Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our page, and we're happy to see you all. My name is Lori Barrientos Sanchez, and I'm the Director of Operations for Busboys and Poets Books. My pronouns are they, them, and she, her. Busboys and Poets Books is an independent bookstore that strives to really support the Busboys and Poets spirit of being a cultural hub for artists, activists, writers, thinkers, and dreamers. Tonight, I've got the distinct pleasure to introduce you all to Kaia Alderson, who goes by she, her, a historical women's fiction author with a passion for discovering hidden figures in African American women's history. Joining Kaia today is Piper Huguley, she, her, a two-time Golden Heart finalist whose historical fiction debut, By Design, The Story of Anne Lowe, Society's Best Kept Secret, will be published in March of 2022. Today's event is a historical fiction novel following Grace and Eliza, two Black women who work overseas for the United States during World War II in an effort to keep communication going between the front lines and back home. Without spoiling too much, this novel is based on the true story of the 6,888th Postal Battalion, the 6888, and explores what life was like for the only all-Black female U.S. battalion to be deployed overseas during World War II. For a copy of Sisters in Arms, you can visit our Eventbrite link by 10 p.m. tonight to get it with shipping included, and that you'll see that message throughout this. And Eventbrite is, of course, the website page that you got to for this event. If you want to purchase Sisters in Arms after today, you can visit bookshop.org/shop/busboysbooks to support Busboys and Poets Books with direct shipping from warehouse to door. We're still being COVID conscious where we can, and that's one way of doing it. You can also visit us in store if you're comfortable, and we have some signed copies and goodies that we'll be leaving along in different locations. So happy hunting. And without further ado, I am actually going to go ahead and get Kaia and Piper on screen. Or I'm sorry, Kaia.
You got it. Kaia.
All right. I'll see you all.
Hey, Piper, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing good. I haven't seen you in a minute.
Not in a minute due to this panty.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am so excited to be here to talk about Sisters in Arms with you, because I think you're one of the people few people have seen very, very early versions of this book.
Yes, it was a very, very early version that I see you don't remind me from that time to time. It was like it had the dinosaurs being like, there was like a pre-dinosaur. That's the version that I saw.
Yes, you did. I think only 3 people have seen that version. So I
liked it a lot, but in terms of it was a little too short. So that was one thing. And then I guess it needed some more historical tie to the thing. You tell us about how you saw that, right? How did that get married to the proto form of it and to the history?
Well, basically, when I first started writing it, it was maybe almost 9-10 years ago, and I was like, nobody wants to read this. World War II wasn't necessarily a thing, and to me, I was just going to write a historical romance novella, set in World War II in this odd time, and focus on that last night in New York before the soldier girl ships out. And so that's what the story really centered around, was the relationship, and I had done some of the historical research, but I hadn't put as much into it. And so that's what I was tinkering along with for about 5 or 6 years. And then boom, one day Tessa, our editor at William Morrow, she put up something on Twitter with this particular picture like this and said, somebody write me this book. And I saw it. You might have been one of the people that even, hit me up and was like, hey, you need to go talk to Tess. And I'm like, I have 100 words, 100 pages.
Yes, I did. I think I was one of the ones that kind of elbowed you, because I saw it and sometimes you see these things and it's like, oh, it hits you like a lightning bolt. But I saw it and I was like, that's not for me. That's for Kaia. So that's why I was like, did you see what she said?
And all those years, I was like, I'm working on a World War II book. It was like, when are you going to finish it? I don't know, but I'm working on it. And then
that was by that time, though, there was the World War II trend happening by that point.
Yeah. So that was a really cool origin story for how Sisters in Arms, the way everybody else is now seeing it, happened.
Yeah, but I don't. Is that's quite not it? I mean, you still had some more stuff to do in terms of hitting her up, and I still want to hear the fairy story.
You want to hear the fairy story?
Yeah, Twitter can get you published.
Twitter will get you published. Isn't that what happened with your book too?
Yes, yes. I'm here to testify too. So
So for the
real people,
for the aspiring writers out there, if that you see an editor on Twitter saying somebody write me this book and it's similar to what you're working on, pursue it.
They mean it
because dreams do come true. Like one thing my husband and I we joke about now is every time an accolade comes for the book or something cool happens, we have a unofficial list of things we never thought would happen. So
Oh really?
Yes.
You have a for real list.
Mental list. Every time something happens,
the mental list. I was about to say, did you write it?
Add it to the list.
Add it to the okay. Add
it to the list.
Okay.
So I'm gonna take some of that mojo and throw it over to you.
Yeah. I appreciate that. So yes, but a lot of people didn't know or don't seem to know that these women, or that there were Black women who, even participated in the military, let alone be in World War II. So I'm going to explain a little bit about that back history for those out there who might want to know about it.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Well, just to give a little bit of background, I've always been a World War II geek, if you will. I learned about Pearl Harbor at a very early age, I think about 5 or 6, and I've always been fascinated, like, what? This whole big event. And one of my grandparents' neighbors, so it was that Greatest Generation that introduced me to it. And they're like, what do you mean you've never heard of it? Because, for them, that was a big defining moment. Yeah. So as I would read, over the years, things like that, I knew about World War II, and then I was like, oh, wow, the Women's Army Corps. And then, intellectually, I knew that, we had Black soldiers back then. So obviously we had Black women, but I'd never seen a picture of it until that picture I showed you.
And so obviously people think about Black men, but they always leave us out of the picture. So,
yeah. Or even just the picture of them. Because if you see the pictures that are out there, they're stunning. Hold up the picture again. Yeah. Hold it up again. Yeah. Get the lighting just right, just to see them. This is them marching in France, in Rouen, for Joan of Arc Day, and this is the plaza where Joan of Arc was actually killed burned at the stake.
Wow.
So I saw that picture and I was like, whoa, that's World War II era uniform. That looks like Europe. What is that? And that started a whole thing.
What is that with Black women being there? Because there you are, having graduated from Black Women's College. This is not the history that we get to hear about in a lot of places, at least until you get to that Black Women's College, because several of the Spelman graduates in.
I think the most notable one is Devi Johnson Roundtree. Right. Who later became a civil rights attorney. And she actually used her veterans benefits to go to Howard Law School.
Yeah, that is wonderful. So in terms of the process that you had in terms of writing it, so if we have any aspiring writers out there, tell us about what that was like.
Well, when I first saw the picture, I was just like, wow, why is nobody talking about this? This is going to be a hard project to research. And luckily, Google is my friend. And, immediately that thing that popped up was To Serve My Country, to Serve My Race by Brenda L. Moore, PhD. And she did basically a whole background. It almost reads like it might have been her dissertation on the 688, the factors and the things that happened to where these women were even in the Army, where we had Black female officers in the Women's Army Corps. And so, that was a very good jump off point for me. And also the very valuable was the memoir written by Charity Adams Early, who was the commanding officer of the 688. And it basically gives her experiences telling just prior to the war, all the way to the end of the war when she came home from Europe. And so I was able to get, at least from her perspective, because hers is a little bit different than everyone else's because she was the commanding officer. So she flew over to Europe versus where everybody else took a Liberty ship or a troop ship over. So that was helpful because then I was able to get the names of other people. I was able to get a sense of what the whole process of being recruited was like. So when you read the book and Eliza and Grace are going through enlisting and things like that, I relied heavily on Charity Adams or Major Adams' account of it. Debbie Johnson Roundtree, she also had a memoir I read later in the process, but that was also helpful to corroborate what I learned from reading Charity's account versus Debbie's versus some other independent ones or some videos that I watched. Also, there's the documentary, The 6888, produced by Lincoln Penny Films. And that was probably the first big research trip that I took after I knew that, this was going to happen and this was going to be a big, big book and not my little fun side project. So I was able to go up to Maryland for the debut or the release of the documentary. That was cool. I got to meet the producers. Hi, Edna. Hi, Colonel Cummings. And I was able to meet Major Adams' son, talk to him briefly, but I did not speak to any of the vets directly just because I felt there was enough room and platform for them to tell their actual lived experiences. And as I was doing my research, sociology major, so, a lot of the themes in terms of what was going on the home front at home with or just women in general going into the workforce, coming out of the Great Depression, Black women in particular, at a certain point, everybody was pushed to be a teacher or a nurse. But at that particular point in time in 1942-41, there was there were teachers that couldn't get jobs. So, I just wanted to talk about that particular experience. And then I came up with the idea of what was it like for a rich Black girl. I wanted to get her on the page, deciding she wants to do her bit for her country, and then in this highly segregated by race and by gender, and not having the freedom she was used to. So that's why I did not, because everybody always asks me, why didn't you talk to any vets? That's why, because there are a lot of different themes sociologically that I wanted to play with in the book.
Yeah, because that's the truth in terms of the 30s and the 40s, the choices for Black women and those percentages for Black women in terms of the jobs that they were permitted to do were very limited to teaching, like you said, nursing and domestic work. So if you were going to be educated, it was almost as if you went to those colleges, and a lot of HBCU colleges were built for, structured for sort of shepherding Black women through those professions. But then when World War II comes, fortunately, there's a recognition that the labor of women can be valuable and that the labor for Black women can be valuable. But unfortunately, it's not enough of a recognition to knock aside all of the stupidity in terms of segregation and all of that. So talk a little bit about the research that you did in terms of the first portion of Grace and Eliza's story that allows them to come from their lives, their day-to-day lives, into the military.
Well, I used a lot of what I knew about my family's history. Unfortunately, I didn't get to I did the deep dive of this particular time period after everybody was gone. So I kind of had to reconstruct what I knew, did a lot of digging in newspapers and things like that. So in terms of, it was important to me to show that these were college educated women, because one, that is how they were even able to be considered to be officers. And also because the thing that always stuck to me when I spoke to my Aunt Carmen, she was my grandmother's first cousin. I always knew she was a teacher, but as part of a homework assignment back in middle school, I talked to her about it. And she said during the war, she was actually a civilian clerk for the Army. And the only reason she got the job, because I was blown away, like, oh, they actually let us do something back then, based on what we were taught. And she laughed and she said the only reason why she got the job is because her supervisor was amused by the fact she was a colored girl with a college degree. So it was important for me to have
like a joke.
Yeah, he was like, okay, whatever. But it was important for me to put that in there. There was a whole scene and sequence I had that, actually had that line, but it didn't work with where the story's going, so I took it out. But it was important for me because I didn't realize how unusual that was. Like for me, I know, for that particular branch of my family, everybody went to college, and they, it was just a given I was going to college because of them. But when I did my research, only 4% of the whole U.S. population had a college degree. So for anybody to have a college degree was a bit of an anomaly. And for a Black woman, if you're not within the community, that, is even bigger, oddball thing. So it was important for me to show that experience in there, because usually the picture we get painted of the Black experience in the 20s, 30s, and 40s isn't always showing that. And so that was important to me to show it. Also, in terms of my research, Piper knows, because we actually went to Iowa. She went with me to Iowa to go to Fort Des Moines.
I was like, I want to see Iowa.
Yeah, it was like, again, a thing of something I never thought I would do is go to Iowa. And actually, Iowa was pretty cool. I was pleasantly surprised, because even in the movies, all you get is Field of Dreams and the cornfields, and it's actually more than that, which is awesome. But that is where the officers trained, at Fort Des Moines. And so we went to Iowa, and we went to the Fort Des Moines Museum. It's not open to the public, even back then, pre-COVID. So you do have to make arrangements if anyone's interested in going. But what was really cool about us being the only ones in there, having the museum to ourselves, is, the museum, half of it is dedicated to the Women's Army Corps from World War II, but it's also dedicated to the Black officers from World War I, because that's where the Black officers who were in the medical corps, surprise, surprise, you don't hear about that too often, trained for World War I. So we were able to absorb all that. And then in the middle of this big old building with the perfect acoustics, they have one of those old timey record players that you had to crank up.
I remember that.
And when you finish cranking it, the acoustics in this place, and you're hearing an original record of Billie Holiday singing Strange Fruit. Just echoing in this building. So that was a highlight of that research trip. I didn't expect to see that. I don't know if you did. So we were able to go there. And we were able to see the uniforms, see the archives. One helpful thing for me is while we were in the archives, we were able to see a menu. So I knew what they ate while they were in training camp. They had the schedules for both, the daily schedules for both the men and for the women for both time periods. So I was able to use that in the story. So that was fun. And then the other research trip I took was to New York. It was for the Romance Writers Conference in 2019. So I was able to go and hang out with people. And then I was able to walk the streets of Harlem to get the feel of Harlem. I'm originally from New Jersey. I've been to Harlem, but I hadn't been in like 20 years. So it was
different, wasn't it?
It was very different, but I wasn't looking for Harlem of today. I was looking for Harlem of back then. So to walk the boulevards with those nice wide sidewalks, to go in the Schomburg, I had an idea of where certain things were going to take place. So I walked on those blocks and looked at the architecture and what would it be like to have to go without maybe an elevator and things like that. So that was cool. And I also took the train. Actually, the one train line I made sure I took as I was going back and forth is the same train that Grace takes at the very beginning of the book when she leaves, where Juilliard was located back then in what I call West Harlem, but on the Upper West Side. And the train she would take from there to go all the way downtown to where the enlistment office was. The building is still there. It's still a federal building. It looks completely different, but I was able to get a sense of that because that's one of the few elevated tracks that are still in New York. And then on another day, I was able to hook up with my dad and go upstate to Orange County to Orangeburg, where is basically where Camp Shanks was located. Camp Shanks, for those who aren't familiar, is basically where everybody who was sent to Europe during World War II had to go out of Camp Shanks. It was the port of embarkation. And so I was able to go in their archives, and they had the actual base newspapers, the original ones. And she was able to pull out the newspapers from the time that the 6888 would have been there, which was last week of January, first week of February. So I know what entertainment they had. I know that the pie shop was a big deal when it opened up there. I know which entertainers were coming.
Probably.
It was cold, yes. There was snow. I knew the train. I was able to see their actual train schedules. I was able to see, again, more of their uniforms. So they had this whole display, because when I went, it was the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So basically 75% of everybody who participated in D-Day for the Americans passed through Camp Shanks. So they had everything I could ever think of. They had winter uniforms, summer uniforms, spring, all of that. They had victory letters, which were basically kind of like the airmail we have today. I was able to see what they had back then. And it was also where when they came back, they had to pass through Camp Shanks then. So they had some information about that too. So that was the gist of my in-person research and trips. Oh, and also while I was up there, we were able to go to the actual dock where that was, it's not completely there, but they had, they built a dock right there on the Hudson River so that the troops could just load onto the Liberty ships upriver and not have to be transported down to the west side of Manhattan to load there to save time. Mm-hmm. So I was able to get that experience, and we had to walk down the path to go to the pier. And I just, obviously I wasn't carrying everything I would carry to war, but I was able to at least get a sense of what it was like to walk that distance in comfortable shoes, but imagine what it was like in boots and things like that.
Yeah, having to carry all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there was even one, speaking of which, they could only bring so many things with them. And I worked it into the story, but one veteran said that she had some red silk pajamas that she wore under her uniform while she was walking onto the ship, because they checked their bags to make sure that she had these red silk satin pajamas on top of all the other stuff she had carried, so she could have that with her when she went to Europe.
She was determined to have her red silk pajamas.
Yes, she was going to be comfortable.
Right, maintain her little pleasure for herself. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. That is awesome. So they were on the ship. Was the ship segregated?
The ship,
or was it just for them?
It would have been segregated because they were women.
Yeah.
I was not able to find the records of the actual trip that they were on, but I think in the same flotilla or the same fleet that went over, they were saying things like 10,000 people per ship. It was basically people and ammunition and munitions and in material and trucks and things like that. So it wasn't like you would have been comfortable, even though the ship that they actually went, or the first ship they went on, was the Ile de France, which was a luxury cruise liner previous to the war, and then it was retrofitted. Mm-hmm. I was able to use Band of Brothers, because they do have a scene showing them on the troop ship, because I would read about how they would have bunk beds stacked 6 beds high, and I couldn't conceive of what that was, but in Band of Brothers you can see it was literally like what you see, what is it called? I'm blanking. A hammock. They're hammocks. Mm-hmm. And then you would just be able to climb up. So what makes that significant is, I put it in the book, is that their boat, the first boat, the Ile de France, the one they were on, was chased by a German U-boat. So they had to do evasive maneuvers of zigzagging, things like that, in the middle of the night. And so they're basically hanging on like this, these hammocks, and everything's flying.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So somebody said they laugh on the red silk pajamas.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep your individuality. That's what's good for her. She managed to do that. Mm-hmm. So when they land, where did they land?
They arrived in Scotland at first. I think they were just outside of Glasgow, and then they had to take the train down to Birmingham within England, which is where they were stationed, and they stayed at and why am I blanking on everything right now? But they stayed at a boys' boarding school that was in Birmingham, and it was very different than what they were used to, because they're coming into a situation, in the US, yes, we had rations, but not like they had in England. The Blitz was still going on, even though I think they had at least one air raid while they were there. I don't know if there was a bombing. I think that happened earlier in the war within Birmingham. It was more centered towards London. So, so everything was under strict blackout. New York only had a dim out. They wasn't completely dark. It was dark enough, but there was completely blacked out. When they arrived, there was no hot water at all. And they're arriving in England in February. So there's still snow on the ground. And the showers, after a journey like that, you want to take a shower. The showers were outside. So they had cold water outside showers in February in England. And if you've been there, then you kind of get a sense of what that is. They had to, when they went to France, they had to stuff their own mattresses with straw. That was like the first thing they did when they arrived in Rouen. Here's a bag. There's a pile of hay. Go stuff your mattress.
Yeah, that's a lot. And then I'm thinking about the sacrifices that these amazing women made in terms of that. But when they got there, they didn't have their assignment yet. Or when was it that they got the assignment that made them their reputation?
They did not know until they got there. Even in the case of Charity Adams and Abby Campbell, who were the commanding officer and the executive officer, the top two officers of the unit, they did not know until they were on the plane. Because basically they were in DC, given their orders and told, you're not allowed to open this until you're at least so many hours in the air. And that's when they found out somewhere over the Atlantic heading towards Bermuda, I think, that, they'll be sorting the mail. Or that where they're even going. Nobody knew. They didn't know they were going to England, if they're going to France, if they were going to Morocco. So it was just once you opened it, once you were en route, that's when you found out, and that's for obvious security reasons. So nobody had any formal training in terms of mail sorting or mail distribution for this specific assignment or deployment. Some people might have had it as a part of their administrative school or in their backgrounds. So they basically had to create a whole distribution system and organizing and sorting system from scratch.
Because it was backlogged, right?
Yes. And for context, for people who don't know, the reason why they went over there was to get the mail moving again. Remember, they arrived in February of 1945. And to backtrack about 6 or 7 months, D-Day was June of 44. And so once they arrived in France and they made the breakthrough onto the European continent, everyone was saying, this war will be over by Christmas. And the focus was getting the materials that they needed and supporting the push into the continent to end the war, because it was going to be over by Christmas. In the meantime, families, girlfriends, grandma is sending packages and letters, and Christmas comes and goes. And as we know, the war still went on. So all those Christmas packages that were sent over were sitting in these, not a warehouse, but airplane hangars in England. So when they show up, they find 6 airplane hangars. If you've seen those old school, or they still use them, the semicircle long ones.
Yeah.
So 6 of them filled from floor to ceiling, front to back of mail. So when they get there, and remember, the Christmas packages by now, or not just Christmas, but anything's been sitting there about 6 or 7 months. So everything is waterlogged. That cake, the fruit cake that grandma sent is rotting. The rats have eaten through the mailbags and are eating the rotting cake. And, maybe a lot of the letters were only addressed to Johnny, who
could have been anybody, because that was a very popular name at that time.
Yeah, because I mentioned in the book, Robert Smith. I think there's like 15,000 Roberts that were in the U.S. Army in Europe at that time. So if you just addressed it to Bobby, they had to figure out which of those 15,000 that was. So they basically think index cards. They had a lot of index cards with every person's name, every person's serial number, where they were. And remember, this is pre-computers. Everything is being done by hand. We have troops moving day by day. And so all those cards had to be updated, as well as keeping up with mail sorting. So it was a job, and they were actually not the first ones assigned to the job. First, they had the men assigned to it, and they couldn't figure it out. Then they had a white WAC unit assigned to it, and they couldn't figure it out. And so they basically gave the impossible job to the Black women, because
that's what we do.
Yeah, and back then, and even if you watch the documentary, even one of the veterans said they never give you a reason to celebrate us. They always set you up to fail. There's a lot of instances of setting you up to fail. So they gave them this impossible job, gave them a deadline of 6 months to get it done. that no one else could do. And they were able to get the mail moving again, get rid of all the backlog in 3 months.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Without a computer, without anything, all by hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hashtag Black Girl Magic for sure.
Yeah.
Because
with cold showers,
amazing.
cold outside showers. So yeah.
So as with this amazing history as a backdrop, you then bring into the story your fictitious characters, Grace and Elijah, and managed to work in a little romance.
I did.
Yes.
And guess what? The romance that you see in there is based on actual men, from Black men from that time. So Jonathan Phillips, who you meet, is based on Truman Gibson Jr. He was the assistant aide to the Secretary of War. And it was his job. And that was a challenge for me, because when I was like, I need to have this romance, and I need to have him to be able to be all these places and have this freedom of movement. But I also need a reason why he's not in the military. He's an able-bodied man, not in uniform. And how does that work? And so, at first I thought, okay, maybe I'll have him be, he was already, he came back injured, things like that. And then I found out about Truman Gibson Jr. and I was like, perfect. And even his dates of when he was in Europe worked out with when I had them in Europe and things like that. So that is based on a real person. There's been no evidence I've seen that he was involved with any of these women. So that's a complete figment of my imagination. And then later on, we also see a doctor who is based on a real doctor who military doctor who was assigned to the 688 while they were in Europe. And he also happened to be the brother of the executive officer, Abby Campbell. In the book, I don't have them related, but the real life person, yes.
And these were Black men.
Yes, they were Black men.
The other thing with history, the people make presumptions about being historically accurate. You could never have a Black male doctor in these places, or this attaché dude going around the world. You didn't have that, but there you have it. You have these real examples, because other people might have looked at that and just been like, oh, I'll just make up some white dudes with it. In terms of that, if you just went by these generalizations that people make about history, rather than going and looking and seeing, as Neil Painter said, Black people are everywhere.
Doing everything.
So, just assuming that could never be, it's better to, actually go and do some research and find out about these people and bring them forward from where people haven't spoken about them in terms of what they might have done or the contributions that they made in terms of the war effort. Like, these are not stories that we're getting in terms of history. So now, as a result of the documentary, were there like certain things that happened for those who remain, who are still living from the 6888?
I think at this point, I want to say there was like 6 or 7 remaining veterans at the beginning of this year, and we lost several over the spring. So I want to say we're down to 5 or 6. And when they returned home from Europe back in, the last of them came home in March of 46, it was basically like, okay, here's your discharge papers, go live your life. There was no recognition for what they did. There was no ticker tape parade or anything like that. And even as time went on, it was kind of, again, maybe grandma mentioned it, maybe they didn't. My great aunt was a WAC officer during World War II. She was not part of the 6888. I had no idea until a couple months ago.
What? You first found that out?
Yes, I just found that out after I turned in the book. I was like, oh, I would have put Aunt Stella in. But, so in terms of that, it's just one of those things. Yes, if you were a history geek, if you were into it, and you went to the reunions, they would have reunions and things like that. So they celebrated themselves. But the U.S. government has never really officially made a big deal of what they did. So right now there is a campaign, and it's spearheaded by retired Colonel Edna Cummings, to get the unit awarded the Congressional Gold Medal. It has already passed the Senate. the bill that's out there has passed the Senate, but the bill that's out there for the House has not. I have lost count of where we are. I think we're still about 100 sponsors short. I mean, give or take. And so the goal is by Veterans Day of this year to have that bill passed so that these women can be recognized while they can still, those who were there can be appreciated and experience it, as well as to have on record what they did. And I know some people think, well, all they did was sort the mail. And yes, you can say that, but again, it was a job that others tried to do and fail. It was given to them as an impossible assignment, and they did it. And if you watch the documentary, if you watch the documentary, there's a moment where there was a monument dedicated to them at Fort Leavenworth, and one of the Kansas legislature lawmen was there to sponsor it and to welcome them. And while he was talking, he sits and he's like, you know what? It just dawned on me. It was letters that kept my parents' relationship together while my father was in Europe and my mother was here at home. It kept that love alive. So, from a certain point of view, I exist because of the work you ladies did. And that's another reason why what they did was important. Just sorting the mail. I mean, anybody who's been in the military, and I've even had veterans, both male and female, talk about how important that letter from home is when you're in the trenches, when, you're getting crammed, you're getting it from every side, and even internally, especially the female vets will say of their experiences, that letter from home, from someone who cares, that, just, keep your chin up means everything.
It set their spirits that meant that they could continue to do the fighting. And those Black women figured out, even narrowing it down to Johnny or Bobby, to get that letter so that their spirits could be lifted and they could continue to do the work that they had been assigned. So, yeah, people always are like, even when Wangari might die, it's just planting trees or something. There's always that kind of impetus to try to reduce it to something that's not important, when these things are extremely and utterly crucial in terms of providing the uplift that the troops needed to get them to keep going so they could win the war.
And their motto was no mail, no morale. So
there you go. It
was important.
And you had a real life historical person show up too in your book. Tell us about that.
Oh, there's a lot of real life historical people peppered in, some named and some not named. And it's been interesting. People come back and say, hey, is this Thurgood Marshall having dinner with their character? Yes, that's Thurgood Marshall and his first wife. Buster, yes. Yeah. Yep. Who else is in there? There is Earl Hines, the piano virtuoso, the jazz man.
Oh, yes, from Pittsburgh.
Yes.
His father.
Who else is in there? General Benjamin O. Davis is in there. He was the first or second Black general in the U.S. Army. I don't know if I want to tell the one that no one has caught yet. He's not named. And if you're
don't tell that. I was thinking about the female, but
female. Oh, are we talking about my girl?
Yes.
Charity Adams.
Yeah. Oh no, not Charity. No. She sponsored the troop. She got the whole thing.
Oh yes,
in the first place.
The Mary Mcleod Bethune. Yes.
Right. Yeah.
She is. She was basically the godmother of the Black women who were in the Women's Army Corps. For those of you who are not familiar with Mary Mcleod Bethune, she founded what is now Bethune-Cookman University, and she started with $1.50 and a lot of sweet potato pies.
A lot of sweet potato.
Sweet
potato pie. Always.
Yep. I have a better appreciation for them pies now.
Okay.
And she was also an advisor to 4 U.S. presidents. She was the head of the Negro division of the National Youth Project during the New Deal, which is how she became friendly with FDR. She was just short of BFFs with Eleanor Roosevelt, but I think she might have even been closer to FDR's mother, which is an accomplishment, if you know that story.
Yeah, was a piece of work.
Yep. And she, if you've heard of the Black Cabinet from the 30s and the 40s who advised FDR, she was a part of that. And when she caught wind that there was going to be a women's Army Corps, she made sure that Black women would have the opportunity to serve their country in the Corps if they desired, and that Black women would also have the opportunity to be officers within the Corps.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing work. So there's all kinds of work that was being done in terms of that. And think about what it might have been if she hadn't been there, insisting on those aspects. So these are not just going to be, low level women coming in.
Well, think about it. Remember I said 4% of the U.S. population had college degrees prior to the war, and after the war, with their GI benefits, a lot of people were able to go to college who probably would not have. From being in the Army, a lot of people got to travel out of their hometowns. And in the case of the 688, they got to go to Europe, to England, to France, to Paris, London, things like that, that they probably might not have been able to without the perk of war, if you will. Yeah. So she had the foresight to say, our people will get educated, they'll get trained, there'll be job opportunities coming out of the Great Depression. If you don't go to college, you can go to trade school. And basically helped, when you think about it, it was World War II vets that were really a lot of the foot soldiers for what became the Civil Rights Movement. And those women that you think of, she made sure that they had what they needed to do what they needed to do in the 50s and the 60s.
Yeah, wonderful stuff. I just love it, every bit of it. So awesome to be able to read and be immersed in your story and see all of those things happening and all of those people and their circumstances. And one of the things that people talk a lot about that we don't see often enough in fiction is friendship between two women, who are not perfect, who are certainly flawed, and have some bumpy patches to get to that friendship, and literally bumpy patches, even when, I'm not trying to let any spoilers out, but one of the characters who goes through a particularly rough patch in terms of her situation. So those stories are not out there a lot of the time, but they are here in Sisters in Arms.
And also, one thing that was important to me is for us in current times, within our own life situations and work situations, when you're like, did that just happen? Was that a moment, a microaggression, or was that racist? And it's all like, how do you respond to that? How do you react to that? And what I found comforting in writing this and making sure that I put in the book was how they, our grandmothers, our great aunts, and everybody who came before us, how they dealt with that when things weren't as good as they are now, when everything was still segregated, where, showing up in the wrong place in public with not only a soldier's uniform on, but an officer's uniform on will get you beaten up. So there's a lot of I found inspiration in learning how they dealt with certain things, and how some of the things we're seeing today is nothing new. Barbecue Barbara calling the cops on us because we're not where we're supposed to be, or we don't look like we're supposed to be there. That happened to them back then, and they dealt with it. When people, you don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure you know that and feel like that every day. And they were able to fight back against that when they decided, when they first show up to training camp and someone decides to put a colored sign on the tables, they dealt with that and they got it handled. So there's a lot of that in the book. And if you are on a path where your life plan didn't work out quite the way you wanted it to, where you had everything planned down to when you're going to have your kids and the perfect career, we talk about that too in the book. So.
Hold up the book again so we can see the cover.
So you can see the cover? Yes. Here's my baby.
Beautiful. I remember you showed me the cover. I gasped out loud. I was at home gasping.
And this was like the first try. Like, because sometimes you hear horror stories like they could never get the cover right. This was what came back the first time. And I was like, yep.
Totally.
Me, I'm a purple girl, as you can see. So I was like, what does this part look like purple? Just for my own ego. And I was like, thank you for indulging me, and I'll leave you alone. You know what you're doing.
Well, there are some questions. So people have some Q&A to present, apparently, Lori. Okay. Very excited to hear all about the research you conducted. Were there any archival discoveries that you wanted to include but couldn't? I love the topic.
Oh, man. If I do go back and write a short story, I need to talk about the boycott that they staged in London. When the Red Cross had hotels and hostels set up for the American soldiers for when they were on leave. And so they had one for the men and one for the women in London. And when they found out these Black women were coming, the Red Cross took it upon themselves to set up a Black and female segregated hotel. And Charity, when Major Adams found out about it, she was like, no, that's not going to fly. And she told them, she had gathered everybody, said, I can't tell you not to stay there, but I encourage you to think about what it means that they did this and whether or not you're going to stay there. And so basically they wound up shutting down the Black female segregated hotel because no one stayed there. And they would rather just take the train back immediately after they did their sightseeing and stay there. So I tried to work it in, and I just couldn't make it.
Yeah, and
it would have been there just to say, hey, they did this.
Yeah, if it's not moving the story forward, it has to go, and those are painful decisions to make. But yeah, there it is. Yeah, and D.L. White says that's a great job on the cover. It's really glad.
Thanks. Yeah, they did an awesome job. Oh, another thing that didn't get into the book, I found very late in the game, mentions of the LGBTQ experience within the 688. No one ever specifically talked about it, or in one case, I only saw one instance of where they indirectly named names, but because it was just that one reference, I didn't want to sit there. It wouldn't fit the story, and it was too late in the game for me to put it in. Major Adams did mention that she had caught wind of talk of there was some homosexual activity, and she just basically made it plain, I am duty bound because of my position. If I, because back then you could get kicked out for that.
Yeah.
I am duty bound. If I know about it, if I see it, I must report it. So if I don't see it and I don't hear about it, I have nothing to report.
Wow.
But in some of the transcripts and interviews that you find of the veterans out there from the 688, they do mention, that they would sit at their own table. You don't want to sit over here or be associated. So so if somebody wants to tell that story and do that deep dive, it's out there.
Yeah, that is for true out there. That would be amazing. In terms of that. And Sharon Flake says hello. Yes. She's a Pittsburgh girl too. So. Are there more questions for our fabulous author? Yeah. No more.
While we're waiting,
yes.
While we're waiting, do we want to talk about Charity Adams and her moment?
Yes, please do.
Okay. I'm not spoiling anything. If you look up anything about a summary of the experience of the 688, this story comes up. And again, I made sure it was in the book because it was very important. But when they first arrived in England, again, they were an anomaly. And so everybody had to come see these colored girls in American uniform doing their thing. Because there's no way girl soldiers, much less Black girl soldiers, could, represent our country well. So that means all the top brass basically that was in Europe or in England at the time would come to Birmingham, request a parade or review to make sure everything was up to muster. And because of their operation, which was 24/7, they worked in 3 shifts. At any given time, somebody was working, somebody was sleeping, and somebody was kind of just, getting everything else done, laundry and things like that. So when this one particular general showed up and he realized there was only 1/3 of the battalion presented before him, he told Major Adams, where's everybody else? And she said, they're working or they're sleeping. And he said, I requested a review of the full battalion, and he ordered her to make everybody stop work or wake up so that he could look at them. And she said, I'm sorry, sir, I cannot do that. Our mission is to sort the mail and we cannot interrupt our operations. He told her, if you refuse to do it, I'll go replace you with a white officer to show you how it's done. And to that, she said, over my dead body, sir, which he obviously did not like. But and he threatened her with a court martial, and eventually he did not pursue that because he was actually the one who was in the wrong, and a memo had gone out stating that we are not to refer or give assignments by race. And because he had made the threat of a white officer, she was able to get away with basically telling off the top brass in Europe during the war. It was not Eisenhower, and she never said who it was. It was not Eisenhower. I did doggedly try to figure out who this man was. Because afterwards, he was actually their biggest ally on the continent. So in one case, once the war formally ended, there was a lot more recreational activities. So they were like basketball tournaments and things like that. And so when their basketball team was invited to play in a tournament, they couldn't get there. This general actually made his private rail car available to get them there. So, and it was basically, you see a lot of that where people underestimate them, but once they show them who they are and what they can do, they earn those tough bulldogs respect, and a lot of doors opened.
Awesome. Let's say, here's this. Firstly, I'd like to thank you as a Black woman for delving into a history that was so violent towards us in order to bring us a story we don't get to hear. Did you find the research process to be emotionally draining? And did you find any kinds of self-care that helped during that time? And do you think this is a time period you will ever explore again in your writing? Thank you for that.
It wasn't emotionally draining for me, because I've read about all the bad stuff that happened. So, and to their credit, I think they cleaned up a lot of their accounts. I don't think they really talked about the stuff that was as bad, but the process of researching them and writing this book was my self-care, because for every bad thing that happened, they had a response to it.
Yeah.
And this particular book, like a lot of people's like, I'm tired of these war stories. And this is not your typical Black history book in that it is, yes, the stuff is there, but I'm showing how they responded to it. We did not just take a beating lying down and then said, yes, boss, whatever you want, boss. They did not call themselves Toby afterwards. Or like I just said, they earned the respect of the people who underestimated them, and then some. So this book in itself is my self-care. And when I have my moments, even in researching other things, I can think back to what these women did and how they responded to things then and after, and be like, I can do it too. Would I go back in this time period? I keep getting people asking me for sequels. I knew I do want to go back to it, but I was like, okay, I'm going to play with some other time periods, but I probably will. I won't say what the sequel people are asking for. You have to read the book, otherwise I'll spoil the end. But while I was researching this, I knew about it, but I'd forgotten the all-girl bands and orchestras that popped up because all musicians
in Europe.
In Europe and in the US. And so, if you read the book, I'm a music geek, or if you just talk to me, I'm a music history geek too. So that's something I definitely would like to play with in terms of that time period, along with other things. And yes, I'm being intentionally vague.
Yeah, that was awesome. With the all-girl bands and stuff. Yeah, I hope to see you do that again. Anything else? Or do you want to talk about your next project?
I can talk about my next project. Oh, I always forget. I forget I have props for that too. My next project, I am going to delve in the Negro Leagues. And I'm going to talk about the only woman who's currently enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Her name was Effa Manley, and she co-owned a Negro League team, the Newark Eagles, in the 30s and the 40s. And she was what we would consider now the general manager. So she negotiated the contracts. She made sure they had their uniforms, did travel arrangements, everything like that, arranged for publicity and all this other stuff. And if you look her up, a lot of the research focuses on her baseball years. But before that, she was actually a civil rights activist in Harlem in the 30s. And back in the 30s, or at least in the early 30s, on 125th Street, you could buy whatever you wanted, but you could not work in those department stores. That was reserved for white women and white people. You could be a janitor, you can clean up after folks, but you could not be on the sales floor. And she actually spearheaded the Don't Shop Where You Can't Work campaign that basically integrated the workforce on 125th Street. That was a national campaign for it, but she was the one that is largely responsible for the Harlem portion of it. Ooh, there is a novel for teens about all female bands. I am getting it. So I'll be talking about, I was telling my editor the other day, she's just a girl with a dream and a baseball team.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's a good log line.
Oh, and also, no one can say definitively if she was a white woman who lived Black, if she was a mixed race woman, but if you assume she was white, she wouldn't correct you. But she was definitely pro-Black, all Black, which is, a diversion from what we typically hear from that time period. It's usually the tragic mulatto stories and, oh, I'm not Black enough, right. I'm not white enough. And Effa did not live her life like that.
Yeah, this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. When is it going to come out?
I think right now it's slated for spring of 23.
Spring 23. Okay. That's going to be awesome. Yeah, okay, that's the last question we had. Here's Lori wrapping it up. Hey. Oh.
I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Your card is great because it'll even let you know you're muted. So, that's so exciting. I started to hear baseball women, and I was like, are we going to get the Black League of Her Own that we've all been kind of hoping for? That
yes.
Continuation story. So everybody else, stay tuned. And then Piper, right quick, when's your book coming out?
Well, it actually got pushed to June 2022 because it's wedding season, I think. So, By Design, about Ann Lowe, who was the Black woman who designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress, which is one of the most photographed wedding dresses in all of history.
Many people try to do their copycats and they're inspired by. So I'm excited to read more about that. And with that, I'm going to say our goodbyes to you all. Thank you.
Yes, goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you for having us. This was great.
Of course. And all right. And again, once more, thank you so much to Kaia and Piper this evening. It was great hearing more about World War II history that I hadn't before, and learning more about your own history woven in this, which is just so priceless and unique, of course. Black women continue to be the unsung heroes in American history, as always. And it was great to spotlight the 688 for all of the Graces and Elizas and their kids and their grandkids out there. Please follow Kaia and Piper online on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook for more information and updates about their current and future projects. Come into Busboys and Poets 14th and V for copies if you want to visit us in store, or feel free to purchase from our bookshop website at bookshop.org/shop/busboysbooks. Just search Sister in Arms in the upper center search bar. You can also visit our Eventbrite until 10 p.m. tonight to purchase your signed copy if you'd like, and that includes shipping anywhere in the United States. We currently can't accommodate international shipping, and for that, we apologize. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and feel free to join us next week for When Your Wife Has Tommy John Surgery and Other Baseball Stories with Ethelbert E. Miller on Thursday, September 23rd. Thank you to everyone at home who joined us, and we hope you're staying safe and well out there. Have a good night, and hopefully happy reading.